Are the people you share Jesus with, who are coming to Jesus, in the churches where they worship, are they growing as disciples? And sometimes they've looked at me and said, what do you mean by that? Because we can tell you big numbers. It's great that you've planted, our 12 partners have planted more than 500,000 churches, seen more than 30 million people come to Christ. Wonderful. But it doesn't answer, so what? Are they becoming disciples? Because we must multiply disciples. It's the responsibility of you and I. We're not here just to go to heaven. We're here to bring people with us to heaven. Good to see you. Really happy to be out here. My name's Steve. I'm the missions pastor here at Southeast. It's really quite an honor for me to talk about missions. My problem is I could go on for hours and hours, maybe days and days. But it's good that the Broncos don't play till 2:30, so we get a lot of time. By the way, none of you are watching them these days. Maybe you are. Sorry. I am really happy to be part of the roundup and closing of our foundations program that Aaron's begun based on the vision statement that we have at Southeast, that we are a Christ-centered community of world-changing disciples. Aaron went through the first three, as you will recall. Very important for us to be aware of them and remind ourselves that we don't just do this because we should do it. We do it that we remind ourselves of who we are, where we came from, where we're going. And by the way, as we grow in our discipleship and pursuit of Jesus, we mature during that process. And so that the way I hear these pillars of our foundation today ought to be different than the way I heard them last time I heard them. So Aaron talked about Pillar one, we're going to develop and live as a spiritually disciplined life, differentiating that from being physically disciplined, emotionally disciplined, whatever other disciplines we work into our life. Spiritual discipline requires something of me. Something in me has to die in that something new rises up that reflects more the life of Christ to others and to myself. Number two was that we will move our brokenness and the brokenness of others towards wholeness. It's easy at times for me to recognize the brokenness of others. I see some of my life group members out here and I can point, I would never do that. But my own life, I am broken, and as I am sensitive to the Spirit of God and pursuing Him, He is persistent, but quietly persistent to convict me of issues in my own life. And we all need to be aware of that and allowing Him to move us towards holiness and use us in that same process to invite others. Aaron used the phrase, we're all welcome to the party. Welcome home. You're all invited. We need to be doing that in the lives of others. And then the third pillar was just last week, we will pursue purposeful connection. I mentioned life groups. It's a big part of how we connect in this church. I was with a new friend from a large mega church. They had 9,000 life groups. He said, everything we've ever done is based on growing life groups where we do healthy church in a small family setting. And Aaron talked about having a Paul in our life. Who is it that we're following, that we're gleaning from? And if we are that Paul, perhaps we're a Paul in a Timothy's life. There should be a Timothy in our life, someone we are speaking into their world. And perhaps I am that Timothy to someone. This guy I spoke with all these life groups, he's been in the missional world years longer than I am. And I thought I'd traveled a lot and discovered he'd traveled to 185 nations. And I thought, there aren't a lot more. So that was pretty impressive to me. And then also the person in that process who is a Barnabas, one who is encouraging. aware of things in your life you may not be aware of. One who speaks almost prophetically of what they see in you and draw it out of you. And am I doing that myself to others that I am engaged with? Identifying growth, identifying attributes of a disciple, and drawing them out. We need all of those things as we make purposeful connection. And of course, the last pillar is we're going to make a global impact. What I cannot let you do is say, okay, we'll do the first three, but you're the missions guy and you will do the global impact. That is not true. Well, it's partly true because I am the mission guy and I will be involved in our global partnerships. But the truth is, the sum total of all our individual impact is what is going to impact this world. If we individually are not engaged in deep transformation that makes an impact on those around us, our spouse, our children, our siblings, our neighbors, our community, the people we shop with, well, you know it all. Your globe is different than my globe. Your globe, the sphere of influence you have, are those who are right around you. Are you engaged intentionally in their lives to draw them toward the Father? Or might you, by neglecting that behavior, be pushing them away from the Father? So we all need to be aware of that and actively participating in that. And in fact, actively sensitive to what you, Spirit of God, are prompting me to do to engage with greater intention into the lives of those who are part of my life. Am I equipped? Are there new skills I need to be learning? Am I teachable? Am I willing to take a step into this chaotic situation, either for myself to be transformed or for the life of that person that I am attempting to disciple and grow? I'm gonna bring up a quote from a guy. His name is Alvin Toffler. He's no longer living. But back in the 70s, he wrote a book called Future Shock. He's a futurist, businessman, author, but he was able, as futurists can do, to look into the decades and century to come and suggest there are certain things we're going to be facing. So in the 70s, he was talking about what are today cell phones. He was talking about what is today email. He was talking about cable television before there was cable television. But he has a quote that's really valuable. When I heard it last year, I thought, oh my goodness, that applies to nearly everything in my life. And so it's going to come up here on the board. I'll read that to you and want to focus on a few words in there really closely. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read or write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. Now, that has broad application. Certainly, he was talking about information and technology. In fact, he coined the phrase information overload. He talked about being overwhelmed by choices. I remember the day when on our little family of 8, 19-inch black and white TV screen, we had 4 channels. Channel 2, Channel 4, Channel 5, Channel 9, Channel 11. We had 5. Here again, I always thought it was 4. 5 channels. And by the way, at midnight, they showed a flagpole, played the national anthem, and everything went off. Now, I always wanted more channels, but today, how many hundreds or 1,000 channels do you have? You can spend the whole night just scrolling through, trying to find something, and you don't want to watch most of what's there. That is information overload. That's choice overload. And so he spoke of that, and you and I are living in that culture today. Now, let's make some application of this because it's going to allow me to address why we as individuals have to be engaged in learning, unlearning, and relearning. And then I'll make some application of it in the broader global missional world. So, in the last year, as you have pursued Jesus, maybe studied, prayed, sat in life groups, had conversations of value and meaning with one another here, or maybe in the church lobby, listened to Aaron and his teaching. What have you learned about who God is? How he's intending to reflect himself to us today in our culture, in our society? What's new about it? Position yourself into eternity future. What is it going to be like 1 billion years into eternity future as God reveals himself even further? And 1 billion years in, we know this much about who he is, his character, his plan. And as a wonderful father, his greatest joy is revealing more of his knowledge, understanding, plan for mankind, eternity past with his son, eternity future and how we will enjoy his presence. We'd better be in a position to learn. We will not have hit the roof on learning. I'm getting to be an old guy, and I have to remind myself. In fact, I go way back. When I was first married, I spoke with such great confidence about everything. My wife finally looked at me and said, "How do you know that?" And I thought, she caught me, because I didn't know. I was making stuff up. I sounded really confident. I don't know if that ever happens to you guys, but you know. So what am I learning? And if I'm learning new things about who God is, his plan for me, his desire to draw out of me new truths, what do I need to hold loosely to and unlearn? Maybe, and this is not, for a moment, Orthodox Christianity, basic foundational truths of Scripture. I hold tightly to things. But there are ruts I have grown into over time. And broadly in the world church community, we need to be careful that we don't so tightly hold to something that we don't make room for loving our neighbors as ourselves. Am I compromising? No. But we want all people who come to this church to feel welcome. That you are not, there's no hierarchy of your sin being worse than my sin. Maybe you did things that were grosser than my gross sin. But in the presence of a holy God, sin is sin. I must not hold so tightly that I disregard the needs of my brothers and sisters who are coming to discover more about who Jesus is. So do I need to unlearn some things, some practices, ways I've behaved that maybe need change? And then, what do I need to relearn? How can I better engage? How do I better engage my children? I'm still learning that. My youngest is what, 31? If I'm not learning, unlearning, and relearning how to engage, of what value will I be in my society today? Doesn't take long to look out and see the brokenness of where we live, who we are. I would rather have my best friends being Andy and Barney and living in Mayberry. I wish I was with Wally and Beaver Cleaver in Cleaverville, wherever they live. Just not Eddie Haskell. I didn't like Eddie. The young people are going, what's he talking about? I wish, of course we wish, but there were certain failures and issues that needed to be resolved at that time as well. We, as a people in this body, must be engaged in impacting our world. This is not optional. This is not something the professional guys, the missional world people do alone. So I cannot let you off the hook there. With that, I'm going to jump into the missional world because this is where I could spend hours with you. As we step into a world of chaos and darkness, we understand that it's going to require of us a willingness to trust God's character, his goodness, his faithfulness, his gentleness, that his desire for us is to stay on the path and to follow him closely. In the global world, the places that we are currently investing our resources in, or I get to invest your resources in, are the toughest places in the world. I sometimes say that the easy places have been reached. Now, no place was ever easy to begin with, but where we're currently working are in those closed and highly insecure parts of the world where I can't speak names or, in many cases, particular locations, and won't be showing you pictures of people because we could put them at great risk. But that's where your dollars are going. In fact, right now, out of every missional dollar that's given here, 99 cents on that dollar is going to these parts of the world. So we are not investing in those parts of the world that have already been reached. I'm going to be careful as well to not speak too much about some of the numbers that I've previously shared with you. For instance, I talked a lot previously. They weren't wrong. Numbers of church plants, numbers of people who accepted Jesus this year, number of baptisms, all good things. But the problem with that is it doesn't speak to discipleship. And discipleship is the core value spoken of in Matthew 28. You'll recognize the Great Commission. We'll put it up on the screen, and I'll read it out to you. And what it doesn't say is as important as what it does say. And Jesus came and said to them, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, and plant churches." Does it say that? Does it say even get people to raise their hands and come forward? Now, I'm stepping on some toes. Doesn't say that. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you, and behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. There's a debate within missional circles about CPM and DMM, church planting ministries or missions, and disciple-making ministries or missions. We're doing more disciple-making missions because disciples do plant churches. But planting churches doesn't necessarily grow disciples. We are actively growing what are harder to count, subjective numbers. How do you know when someone's a disciple? How do you know when you've succeeded at growing disciples in your church, in our church? How do we know when you're a disciple? How do you know when you're a disciple? We have a responsibility, following that mandate of Jesus, to grow ourselves as disciples. What are evidences of that happening or not? Are there not observable traits, behaviors, fruits of the Spirit? Activities, what you become aware of, you respond and you engage and you participate in differently as a disciple than you ever did when you weren't. And so we're really hopeful for you to be growing that, feel a responsibility that we are in fact engaged in helping you grow as disciples. What you are taught, what you are challenged with, how we participate in our life groups is about growing us as disciples, world-changing disciples. I mentioned that there are numbers. The problem with me saying our partners, we've only got 12 partners now, which is very intentional. We had 47 and we've cut back to 12 who are deeply aligned with us. We are deeply engaged with. Our partnership levels with them are significant. It allows for a number of things that when I have a discussion with them, I don't just ask them about, okay, how many churches were planted, how many people came to Christ? Not unimportant numbers. Those are very valuable. But the mandate is disciples. Tell me about discipleship. Are the people you share Jesus with, who are coming to Jesus, in the churches where they worship, are they growing as disciples? And sometimes they've looked at me and said, what do you mean by that? Because we can tell you big numbers. It's great that you've planted, our 12 partners have planted more than 500,000 churches, seen more than 30 million people come to Christ. Wonderful. But it doesn't answer, so what? Are they becoming disciples? Because we must multiply disciples. It's the responsibility of you and I. We're not here just to go to heaven. We're here to bring people with us to heaven. It's our responsibility, it's their responsibility. It also puts an unfair weight on people's, in the churches of the world, who feel like, well, we gave you a number last year, we need to give you a bigger number this year because you give us money. And Now, no one speaks that out, but it is an unfair kind of leverage we can hold over. It's much more important that we go into the discipleship discussion and develop ways of reflecting appropriately the subjective side of the equation. It's easier to count churches. It's easier to count how many of you came to church today, how much money did you give? Great, thank you very much, go home. But would we be growing disciples? Would we be responsible to you if that's all our expectations of you were? And so we are actively engaged in the subjective side of that discussion. Tell me about how people are changed in your fellowship. The people you are sharing Jesus with. We've got partners in Cairo right now working in part of old Cairo they call Garbage City. And there are hundreds of thousands. There's no knowledge really of how many Sudanese refugees have come into old Cairo. There's an official number registered, but there's an unofficial number much greater than that. Sudan, civil war, nearly 100% Muslim nation, apart from a few believers. Well, our Egyptian partners are working with our Sudanese identified evangelists to care for the thousands of Sudanese refugees living in Garbage City. Not only in Garbage City, but living on the garbage dumps in Garbage City. Eking out a life. They're not welcome. The nation doesn't want them there. They provide no services for them. But our indigenous Egyptian partners working with indigenous Sudanese evangelists are making disciples of Sudanese people who are coming in great pain, with great need, not welcome, not cared for, and they are growing as disciples of Jesus. Amazing opportunities we're seeing happen there. So our lifelong pursuit, becoming disciples, and we're able to do that and replicate that to other people's then. We have a mission statement here at Southeast for our mission department. I want you to see that. If you've seen it again, great. But this is who we are and what we do at Southeast Missions. We invest our resources, and by our, I mean your, to multiply disciples of Jesus amongst the world's least reached. I want to talk to you about the differences between unreached, lost, and least reached, okay? Very important, there's a difference. Are we, I'm gonna put up a map here, and you'll see on half of it the Parker area, and the other half I'll identify what you're looking at up there. Are there lost people in Parker? Are there people who have not yet accepted Jesus? Of course there are. I mean, I don't know, of course. You may be sitting here today because you're inquiring, you're looking at, you've heard about, you thought, maybe they would welcome me at this church, and we do. On this map on the left, you're seeing, I just did a Google search. When I say Google search, or hey Siri, all of your watches are gonna start beeping. I did a quick search on Parker. And this is just a chunk of Parker, about 10 square miles of Parker up here. How many churches are there in Parker? Well, there's 18 of them that showed up just in that chunk. And that's about 10 square mile, okay? Southeast is way up in the top left corner there. This other one, this is Afghanistan. And this is not all of Afghanistan. It's only about 100,000 square miles. There are about 252,000 square miles in Afghanistan. Same search. How many churches are there in Afghanistan? Well, the blue one's not a church. That's just the country. There's one in Kabul. And in fact, it's not a church. It's a chapel in the Moroccan embassy, which no longer exists. So erase that one. The difference between the lost and the unreached is access. Anyone living in Parker could come to church today, could be here, could go to one of the 17 others on this map, and probably a number of home churches that are functional. They could, by the end of this day, have a Bible in their hand. In fact, if you need a Bible, we've got them in the prayer room. It's not the case in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, if you wanted to go to church, it would need to be a highly secretive underground church where, at risk of their lives, they are meeting I would say today, but it's already tomorrow there. In fact, got an Afghani friend who, when he was young, the Taliban blew off one of his legs, and he determined the rest of his life he was going to find Taliban and kill them. And during that process, he heard about this Jesus. And here's another differentiation between unreached and least reached. You've got unreached people groups and frontier people groups. Afghanistan is typically frontier peoples who have not only never heard, but they've never met anyone who has ever heard the good news, the gospel about Jesus. While he was pursuing the Taliban, a 12-year-old with one leg, because he was going to kill them all, he heard about Jesus. From one of the few. At the time, there were expat communities still in the country. He heard about Jesus, and he was interested, but he was still going to go kill the Taliban. Over time, in a total span of 5 years, between hearing about Jesus, being discipled by believers without ever having accepted Jesus himself, he was finally able to get a Pashtun Bible in his language and began to read and understand who this Jesus was, what Jesus came to do for him. 5 years later, he accepts Jesus. It's transformed his life. He is now actively engaged in underground churches and women's rights. Women have no rights in Afghanistan. And so he's doing women's education programs in country. The last we heard within this last month, about 19 have been arrested and are sitting in prisons in Afghanistan. Now, can't imagine what that might look like. It's not a comfortable bed and 3 square meals a day. That is what people are going through to grow and become as disciples. He's now actively with his family in North America welcoming in refugees and asylees from Afghanistan who are settled, in fact, within an hour of this church, our neighborhoods of Afghanis, Iraqis, Burmese, Nepalese, within our very Denver metro area that we could be similarly engaged with. I want to talk about what we've recently gone through, hopefully are done with, but it was the pandemic. And during the pandemic, globally, huge pain and suffering. United States alone, over 1 million people died during the pandemic. I would imagine numbers of us know people personally, maybe family members, maybe close friends who passed away during the pandemic. But I also want to focus on, in the midst of that, the incredible victory for the kingdom of God that is coming out as a result. Yes, it was painful. What the devil meant for harm, the Lord is using for good. Well, look at this verse that we're maybe familiar with. We're familiar with the last verse of it, but John 10, 8-10, all who came before me, this is Jesus speaking, are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. The thief comes to kill and steal and destroy. Was that the pandemic? I came that they may have life and have it more abundantly. The result of pandemic in global mission circles is a phenomenal awakening globally. All major religious people groups of the world are having these awakenings, particularly within the Muslim world. Phenomenal awakening. What's that got to do with pandemic? During pandemic, the majority of the Western missional world, Western missionaries, Western mission organizations, either shut their doors or came home. They needed to by requirement or for safety's sake. It wasn't planned, wasn't intended, but then what happens? Does everything stop? The indigenous national churches have been maturing over time. It's a great celebration. And when we didn't know what would happen when we left, we've come to discover, after returning 2-3 years later, they have rocked it. The numbers of peoples amongst their people groups that are coming to Christ is skyrocketing in numbers we have never seen in the missional world. And it does not diminish the value of what we've been doing. I've been doing missions since '79. I've worked in 75 nations, seen lots of people. Some of my best friends do not look anything like me. In fact, this is unusual for me to be standing here and talking, because I normally don't speak or talk to an English-speaking group. I'm saying it in English, and the guy next to me is translating it into whatever language he is, and sometimes it goes to the third person. And you never know. It's like that game Telephone. You know, you whisper in the ear, and you wonder. You know, I'll say something like from John 11, and Jesus wept. And by the time it gets down here, it's 15 minutes. And I have no idea. It was probably really good. But I've also grown comfortable understanding that it really doesn't matter what I say. They're going to say what they want their people to hear, which is great. That won't happen here, so I got to be a little bit more careful. But this missional shift is a good thing. It is frightening to a lot of missionaries lifelong who've been in a place, have grown accustomed to how they live, how they practice, the people who receive their instructions and follow up on that and do what they say to do. But the indigenous church has been maturing to such a place that when the Western missional world stepped aside, they stepped into it with great boldness, not knowing, are we capable of? And it's not unlike, you know, there was a point at, when my kids were 25, it was time to introduce them to the front door. And I love you and everything, but, and it doesn't matter how much I love my children, but if they're 40 years old, living in my basement saying, what's for dinner, here's my laundry, I've done them no service. I've actually done them a great disservice, disallowing them to function well in society. Well, indigenously, globally, we are learning in the global mission world to learn, unlearn, and relearn. We are learning that the indigenous churches of the world have matured, have grown capable, by and large. Our role means that we have to release more to them and repurpose. I've got a couple of friends that are CEOs of very large mission organizations with thousands of people around the world. And as we have these discussions, they acknowledge, yes, this is happening. But our challenge is going to be our own people, because they're not accustomed to taking this back row kind of position in this, yielding. But they know it's time to do this. Our board members are not accustomed to us functioning differently than how we have. Okay. And I assure them this is not a light switch. I'm not saying as a funder of your organization, we're switching the light and tomorrow we're doing it all different. But it is definitely a dimmer switch. The switch is happening, and we all know that. And rather than fear, we must enter into this with great celebration. This is exactly what we've been intending to do, commanded to do, from the day Jesus breathed out that verse from John 10:10. His intention, or Matthew 28, the Great Commission, his intention has always been that disciples would be made of all peoples. We will not complete the job, they will. And they're doing it very efficiently and effectively. So it's a great celebration that we are going through even in the missional world too. On this picture, I've got a map of the various nations I was in. Boy, this is summer of 22 till May of this year. I went to 10 nations, the closest being Egypt, and others you can see way out there. It shows North Korea. I was actually right on the fence line from about the edge of the stage to here with North Korea, working with North Koreans to reach North Koreans who believe that the day is coming when that border will open. We will be receiving our North Korean brothers into the 21st century. Who's going to be here to welcome them, to help them learn how to engage well in our society today? Bangladesh, oh my goodness, we as a church, we're funding some Western missional operations. Good people's doing great things, but when they left, What happened? Our monies went to 113 Bangladeshi evangelists, many of whom had no education. Some had college and advanced degree education. The 113 Bangladeshi evangelists began reaching, because they're called of God, reaching their own people. I got a spreadsheet 6 months into that work of all of the names of the evangelists, all of the unreached people groups they're working in, the various languages. These are people who each speak 4 to 6 languages. And the numbers who accepted Jesus and that they are presently discipling. After 6 months, more than 26,000 people, 26,689 in a 6-month period. It is amazing. Yeah, you can clap for that. That number has never been seen in the history of global missions in a 100% Muslim nation like that. And that's just 6 months. I haven't got the latest numbers, it's pretty crazy. I could tell a story for all these. In Turkey, I was at the epicenter in May of the earthquake earlier this year. And I was in Antioch, what they would name Antakya. Antioch was the place where believers were first called Christians, as you remember biblically. It's right down the road from Tarsus, where Paul comes from. The city is flattened. People are living in tents. City of 86 million, nearly entirely Muslim again. 10,000 known believers in the country. Who are taking care of the people living in tents now? It's the 10,000 believers. And all of the peoples, these internally displaced peoples, IDPs we call them, are aware the ones caring for us are not our own, but they're these people who love Jesus, that bring us food daily, water, hygiene materials, teach our children, have sports programs for our kids. And these people will be in these tents for 3 to 5 years. So the opportunities right now, when the devil came to kill, steal, and destroy, generating opportunities for life and life more abundantly. So pandemic did one thing, natural disasters does another. Really important. There was a woman there in Antioch who was the sole remaining member of 41 in her family. When the buildings collapsed, she lost everyone. Herself, she did not want to be living. You can imagine what kind of loss that was. But to then begin to recognize, and the only ones who care for me are these people who love Jesus. Pretty powerful impact that is making. I got to keep going on because I could talk and talk and talk about these things for a long time. These are good stories. Okay, what I want to go on to is talking to you about our part in this. The world of global missions and opportunities because of technology, and we've all grown accustomed to Zoom and such things, is changing. There is one of our partner organizations we're working with is called Switchboard. And you'll see some information up here as well, switchboard.io. It's a platform. So those of us, 99% of the church is never gonna do missional stuff. But 99% of the church still are gifted peoples with gifts that are not secular gifts. You think they are, but God has wired you the way you are to be engaged in the world of needs for his purposes to grow his kingdom. But I can only do this. Yes, but there are people in the world looking for that gift. So Switchboard is a platform. We go in and list the 50 things we love to do or are gifted at, or the 5 things. On the other side of the world, we're working with pastoral people, missional people, different parts of the world who have specific needs. And the match is made on Switchboard on that platform. It's a great opportunity to engage today. Another thing we're going to be doing is continuing short-term mission trips, but less of which I am organizing. A lot of work to organize these things, and I'm not trying necessarily to get out of work, maybe a little bit. But there are groups, one of our partners, E3, are really, really good at planning. Their goal as well is making disciples of all peoples, especially the least reached. But they organize wonderful short-term mission trips where they train you beforehand, you have great experience while you're there, and they follow up with you, and it's all about discipleship. They provide a catalog of opportunities every year that I could never keep up with you. Choose your cost, the location you want to go, the programs you want to do, and time of year. All of those things, you have some options to, and I would highly recommend them. I've done 8 of their trips myself, so I am pretty aware of how they do what they do. I have shared my testimony more with them on a mission trip than any other organization I've ever gone on. And then, let's see, what's the next thing we got up there? I think that was pretty much it. There's a website called Stratus that I would encourage you, stratus.earth. I can only share so much up here that, as I said, I got a lot more I'd love to share. Stratus.earth is a great place to go because it tracks the believer, Christian, unchristian, reached, unreached components of the world, but it also draws into it the great commandment kind of conditions of health, under 5 death rate, maternal death rate, education, food insecurity issues. And it blends all of this together. So you have a better education about where the neediest parts of the world are. So I'd encourage you to go and take a look at that. You can always contact me, the missions at southeastcc.org. Emails come to me, but don't email me and expect a quick answer. I'm going on vacation tomorrow. This is the whole, you preach and get out of Dodge is the idea. So if you need someone right away, there's Aaron.couch. Not sure if he's in here. But I'll get back to you. I'd love to get back to you and have these discussions with you. Your gifts are not just for you. Your gifts are given and woven into Psalm 139 by God for his purposes. And I want to encourage you and welcome you into this task of completing the Great Commissions. Our communion servers are going to get up and start to gather the elements so we can share with those together. We practice an open table here at Southeast. Those of you online, if you're going to participate, please gather your goods and items together. An open table so that if you have accepted Jesus as your Savior, you are welcome to participate with us. We would love to have you do so. And while that's happening, I want to share some implications for us to be considering. Implication 1. Our actions, choices, and engagement with this generation determine what kind of impact we will make, drawing people to or driving them away from God. We don't get to live a neutral life where we make no impact. I mean, all of us had moms and dads, and what kind of impact did they have, good, bad, or otherwise, in our lives? Many of us are moms and dads. Many of us are grandparents. What is our role to make an impact in the lives of those that we are closest with? It is not a neutral game. We have a responsibility. Implication number 2, God is actively moving to complete his eternal plan among the world's least reached and invites us to participate. The gifts he's given the entire body of Christ are for his plan and purposes. Again, be praying, be giving, but consider, Lord, is there a way you can use who I am, what you've given me with for your purposes and plans? Whether that's a switchboard across the world or in Metro Denver area where there are neighborhoods of refugees looking for you to engage them. Implication 3, the post-pandemic work of national believers is resulting in a significant awakening. We must celebrate this disruptive shift, re-engaging to further equip and empower indigenous workers. You probably engage people who will wonder about why the world is changing as it is, why missions is changing differently than. I hope this was useful for you to consider that the empowering of the indigenous peoples and national churches is actually a great victory. This is a 2 millennia long wait we've had for this to happen. It's a very exciting time. And implication number 4. A healthy community of disciplined followers of Jesus, reflecting him well to our neighbors near and far, brings his kingdom to earth as it is in heaven. the impact we are working towards. If you look closely at that implication, challenge you at your life groups this week or times of study, you'll see all 4 pillars of our vision statement in that implication. We'll go over this vision statement, these pillars again in the future. And let's determine, as we'll do with tithing and other topics that are foundational to the church, let's make sure that we do so anticipating new enlightenment, that God himself, by his Spirit, will prompt new things in our life that we can participate in and engage with. On the night he was betrayed, Jesus took the bread and broke it and gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat, this is my body. Do it in remembrance of me." And after dinner, he took the cup and he said, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Whenever you drink it in remembrance of me." Let's drink. Father, with the same gratitude we have in receiving the blood and body of Christ to remind us of your provision of a way to be reconciled to yourself, we celebrate what is happening globally, the awakening we're seeing amongst hundreds of thousands, millions in the world who are being drawn to you, and through so much more empowerment of indigenous peoples. Lord, the day will come when every tribe, tongue, and people will stand in your presence and worship you, and we look forward to that with great anticipation. We look forward, Father, to celebrating the victory and your plan being accomplished as you determined it would be. We love you for that.